Wednesday morning, session 2 out of 5. Today we'll be talking about public information. As we mentioned, these workshops are designed by or assisted by through consultation with the mentors and also delivered with assistance of the mentors. So on Monday we had planning. So Greg Pickle, Susie Perry and Kaio Fenner really assisted with bringing the planning workshop together, and that was awesome. So thank you so much for that. Nicole Kearns and Kirsten Phillips assisted with public information today, and will also be assisting in the delivery of that today. So thank you so much for that. It's really great to bring that really current knowledge and experience to the table for these workshops to bring it all together. So thanks for that. And also, hopefully, Greg, today we'll be maybe discussing the risk is hazard plus outrage question you had, because I think in a public information forum that's quite appropriate to discuss and see what others think of that particular comment. With that, the comments and questions, feel free to drop things in the chat. We might not address it in session, but we will, either someone will answer it there or after or later. We can always discuss it because we don't maybe not have time for all the questions. We'll try and answer it, or someone will try and answer it in the chat or in the session. But definitely it's fine to have the engagement there. As far as safety goes, we will have a break. If you have any technical issues or concerns, Caroline is your first protocol, even though Caroline is also the safety officer, is feeling a little under the weather. So second option would be Jutta if there's any challenges. And if you need to drop out as well, drop it in the chat or let us know so that we know where you are, that you're safe and that you're just doing something else for the minute. That is, I think, housekeeping. Okay, so let's get started. So really what we know is the purpose of these workshops is to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. We want to get a good understanding of what other functions are experiencing, what their challenges are, how they need the other functions, and what they can offer the other functions as well. So that if we're working together effectively, that we will improve the outcomes of the response. That's really what we're trying to achieve, and also build those relationships between those different functions. You often do training and exercises with the people that are within your specific function, and now we just want to bring that more together to build a cohesive group and mutual understanding and empathy, which empathy is good in a response. Some of the key topics that we brainstormed that would be really relevant to discuss today in relation to public information is the challenges of public information. It is a challenging space. We see that play out every day. So that is definitely interesting to discuss. It's really good that we're going to address where public information can assist the other functions and where those other functions can assist public information. And also highlight the value of public information in each stage of the response. Sometimes we think, oh, we're just doing this and we'll tell public information later to pass on the message. But if you involve them much earlier in the process, you might increase your chances of success because they might have really good tips about stakeholder risks that you need to consider in the way you word your particular products or plans or response measures that you're going to design. We're going to practice some stakeholder mapping and risk management, and also highlight the importance of communicating early, proactive and reactive comms, and how much value it adds to be proactive. So that's some of the key topics for today. And with that, we want to also highlight that your response, within your response, communication is a critical thing. It's many after action reviews have highlighted this, and many, as you can see here, former Emergency Services Commissioner mentioned it after the Black Saturday bushfires, that communication is the critical part. You might have your whole response under control, but the communication internally between agencies, with the community, key stakeholders, that's what the performance indicators of the success of your response. And that is definitely very important to keep in mind. We're doing a lot of after action reviews at the moment in relation to the floods as well. Comms is absolutely critical. That's what you'll be judged on. And what we're seeing currently play out with lumpy skin disease, foot and mouth disease, the media and comms around that is massive, and it will only become bigger. So that's why this is super important, what we're discussing today. The session goes for 3 hours. All sessions go for 3 hours. We'll start with a short recap of the function, the functional roles and responsibilities of the function. how it relates to the overall response in the other functions. And we're going to do an activity where you'll be divided into each of your functions and where you're asked, how do you contribute to public information and how do you think public information can contribute to your function? So we're going to brainstorm that and discuss that. We're going to, unfortunately, the incident controller that the perspective would be shared isn't there today, but we pass on his message. That was, we do have the information that was said, so we'll pass it on his behalf. Kirsten will be talking about the challenges and what's really critical in public information. Then we'll have a short break. And then the rest of it is all activities, reputational risk, communication challenge, stakeholder mapping, all that till 1 o'clock. We'll have a short debrief. Everyone okay with that schedule? All fine? Any questions so far about today? Good to proceed? Cool. Right, so public information, and Kirsten, I'm going to ask you to assist me to talk through these particular functions if you're ready. So public information sits within the incident management team, and all functions need to work together effectively in order to achieve the objectives of the response, but there's specific subdivision of functions within public information. And Kirsten, if you'd like to talk to these, the different roles.
Thanks, Lisa. So, yeah, we say there's 8 functional roles within public information. So there's obviously the public information management function. Then under that, there's media liaison, which I think is pretty self-explanatory in terms of handling all press releases, holding statements, press conferences, all of that sort of thing. Social media, obviously that's ramped up in the last few years. In a large-scale outbreak, we'd be looking at social media to potentially be one of those functions that may have to be 24/7. And we've seen that in large-scale incidents elsewhere. But social media would do social media monitoring, set up listening tools, prepare all the social media posts, and also the advertising schedule around that. Website, again, pretty self-explanatory, but looking at the whole web content. Collateral is a bit of an interesting one. It includes anything from, publication advertising to signage to fact sheets, any sort of that printed material or electronic material that may need to be packaged up into resource kits and provided. That function would also pick up all of your, say, communiques and alerts to industry and the like. So that all fits under collateral. Call center, just as it says, it's taking the inquiries. And then stakeholder engagement is about a big focus on your industry engagement, but also your community engagement and how that would all be set up across the response. And then really important one, internal comms. If we don't have our internal comms right, and I'm sure we're going to cover this in the reputational risk side of things, it can cause a whole lot of difficulties for the response. Obviously, like all the functional areas, these are scalable. Depending on your response, we often mash some of these roles together in terms of what they deliver, but it just depends how big your response is, what functions you need. Thanks, Lisa. Did you want me to touch on the manual as well?
Yeah, for sure.
So the Biosecurity Incident Public Information Manual is our guiding document. It lives on the AHA website, but it's actually an all hazards approach. So we use it for all incidents. The manual's broken into 4 parts. So public information policy, which kind of is the guiding principles for how we run PI in a response. Public information operations then is more of your detail around how we deliver in certain functional areas. So for example, the operational principles around how we manage media. The next section is really important, job cards. So that obviously has all the role descriptions from a national coordination centre all the way down to the LCC. So whenever we need to recruit for positions, we'll go to those job cards and they're all there for us for the PI space. And then the last one are the templates and forms. So there's all sorts of templates in there, including national talking point templates for checklists in terms of what government would be expected to deliver, what industry would be expected to deliver in the early days of a response and the like. So all of those sorts of templates are in part 4. Thanks, Lisa.
Awesome. Thank you for describing what those roles are within the function and how they contribute. That's fantastic. Thank you. Awesome. So public information has to work together with this other function and gets critical information from them, as well as passes critical information back, which we're going to workshop in a second. Just one example for where you can see how it works together is when it comes to case management. A case manager might be dealing with an affected premise with a producer or grower, but that producer or grower also gets information from social media, web, which public information is putting out. They're also getting information possibly from their peak industry body, which the industry liaison officer is liaising with. So they're getting all this information via different channels. And we all know that information has to be consistent. The moment that that is not consistent, then it starts to become the grower starts to lose faith in that the response is on track. So there you can see that between the incident controller who sets the priorities and the expectations, between the public information officer, between the industry liaison officer, and between the case manager within ops, there has to be a very close working relationship to ensure that the communication is consistent, that the public information officer and the industry liaison officer also understand what is going on with that particular grower producer and what the challenges are on the ground, and also that feeds back to the incident controller. So that is one of the examples where those different functions work together. So now we're really going to pluck your brain first to see what you think where those other collaboration points are, and then we'll discuss if there's any others that we would need to consider. So with that, we're going to go straight into breakouts. We're going to start this day very active. We're going to ask you to go to breakout groups, and they'll be per function. To do a quick introduction, allocate a scribe. I'm going to confirm now, are the templates sent out? Emailed? You should have an email. Please test that you can open this. And Greg will get to that question in a sec as well. So do a quick introduction, allocate a scribe. Everyone confirm also that you have received email with templates. Anyone?
Just a thumbs up or something.
Will be in your inbox very shortly. Okay. So do a quick introduction, allocate a scribe. The scribe is to bring up the template, discuss your answers and record them in the template. Appoint a person to brief back the answers. And when you're completed as well, can you email the sheet to Caroline Dunn, because we're doing also a report after the full workshops on the workshops. So we would like to capture the feedback that everyone produced. So the question that you need to discuss with your group is, what do you need from public information in order to do planning, in order to do operations, in order to do logistics, in order to do incident management? What do you need from public information? But also, what do you think that public information needs from you? And just brainstorm it, and then we'll discuss it later. And I'm sure Kirsten and Nicole will provide their view on where those touch points are. Did everyone now receive the email with the templates? No control. Awesome. So that was really good conversations. I got some really interesting ideas for the Logs Friday session as well. So thanks for those questions, and that was good. Who would like to go first? We can. Otherwise, I'll just probably appoint someone. Would planning like to go first? Would you have one or two planning groups?
Oh, we had two planning groups, did we? Let's. Well, I don't know, because we didn't see Susie on ours. Ours, we thought that we didn't have a lot of planning people. We only had two planning people.
No, we had two. We had two groups of two or something.
Oh boy, value-adding.
Did you want yours go first, do you, mate? Or?
Yeah, we'll go first. If Lisa could just put up the shared screen, I think if that could be done through our technology. It's coming, I think. Righto, we just quickly went through and we found out that public information needed more from planning than what planning needed from them, only by one. We were trying to get them level, but we didn't quite make it. Let's start on the left-hand side, which is what public information needs from planning. We believe technical information for pest and disease to go into that collateral and the messaging, just to make sure some of that is very clearly right when it goes out. Information on where the response is planning to go, a lot of the forward planning. So therefore we can, if we're identifying issues that may be some outrage factor or whatever that we can see coming, that public information has actually got the heads up nice and early so we can manage around that. That's the number 3 as well. Information on legislation and control orders, restrictions in place. A lot of the times that can be very legalised, and we really need to make that so it's fairly easy for people to understand what roads and the rest. Having graphics on mapping of effective areas. People like to be a lot more visual, so we need to make sure that those maps are quite accurate and making sure that we could actually supply those through our systems. Having the stakeholder list, any stakeholders which we believe we're dealing with, that make sure they're on the stakeholder list. And also we believe across here is feedback on any issues. It's planning and public information need to be very close in the feedback of issues back and forward, so that we're on the front foot both in planning and in public information. What planning needs from public information is consistent messaging. That just sort of minimises the amount of crap that comes back and forward, so we really need that consistent messaging. Some feedback on any major issues that they see that comes through, and have that very good feedback loop. Again, both sides of the thing, it seems. Stakeholder mapping. We certainly require updates for SIT reps and IAPs. We also need to make sure that the PI resources are in the resource plan, so we're very clear on that. And for sure, if we've got a public information response plan, which is part of a template which they've got, how does that actually input into the response plan? So we're quite clear that, you know, we've got a whole pile of plans coming out. Let's make sure there's some coordination across all the plans. So those are the ones which we quickly went through before we were disengaged.
Booted out. That sounds excellent, and I think we just hear from the other planning group as well before we ask Kirsten and Nicole to share their thoughts on that. But that was excellent. Thank you, Greg. That sounds very logical to me. Where's the other planning group?
We might have to confirm with Carolyn, but I'm not sure that we ended up having enough numbers
Okay.
to have the second group.
That's the second group's up now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
So is
Yeah.
this document visible to anyone?
Yeah, I can
Everyone?
see it, mate.
Yeah. Okay. So we were able to fill in the whole right-hand side. Now, what needs public information from the planning function? Obviously, they need the situation reports that includes the latest on the situation and functional updates, the maps, stakeholder lists, and so on. They need access to the incident action plan, so they know what's happening across the response. Access to the common operating picture. Involvement in the planning processes. That's about stakeholder mapping mostly. And access to other response intelligence that's been collected just for comms purposes. What do we need from public information? So first of all, we need to get their information into the SIT reps, also input into the incident action plan, so involve the PI function in the planning processes. Also the stakeholder and communication strategies need to be established by PI. We talked about expectation management, stakeholder expectation management on Monday. That's probably part of that as well. We need some comms collateral, including website updates, maybe fact sheets, talking points if required. Media training, we thought would be a valuable thing to have potentially. Facilitation of stakeholder engagement activities, and also communications risk assessment in relation to dealing with internal and external stakeholders. There's probably also some stakeholder expectation management involved in that. And then we need confirmed resources, comms resources as part of the planning process as well.
Yeah, excellent. Kirsten, Nicole, did you want to? Is this on point?
Look, I think they're both pretty good in terms of the summary. Definitely planning is a big one for us in terms of relying on planning as our SME bank. So that's where we need to go first and foremost for our advice and technical advice on what's happening, and then definitely what's on the horizon. So and then in terms of supporting planning, definitely around that stakeholder engagement function is a big one. Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, absolutely. We did discuss that. It's that intel sharing and being aware of so that the risk comes back to planning, and the planning can feed that into the plans and take that into the considerations and be involved as early as possible in the piece with the planning process, so that those risks can be considered within the response strategies. Okay.
One other thing from my end was
yeah.
Data. I thought of it just then as well, where data is often a huge one that we use in our comms, and it can also be a sensitive one from an IMT perspective with the checks and balances and how do we get it right. I know in some responses I've been in, there's sometimes hesitancy to be talking about data as well from a public perspective, but it's really crucial in our messaging and what people want, and helps to make our responses newsworthy as well.
Yeah. And that just made me think of that intelligence cycle that we discussed on Monday, where you verify information and confirm how reliable certain information is, because in public information that is critical that somebody's doing that checks of that information that's going out there, fact checking it and ensuring that this is reliable information, this isn't, this is based on reliable sources, this isn't, this is verified, and this isn't. So because that's absolutely critical.
I think Greg just had a follow-up question, data or summary of data. So this is, I suppose it can be anything, can be, you know, how many IPs, how many hives destroyed, not thinking of any particular response right now, how many, you know, Victoria, it was really contentious in 2020 around how many birds destroyed, and trying to keep that number consistent, and you know, different field, especially it gets complicated when you've got multiple LCCs that might be using slightly different methods, and making sure they marry up and that type of thing as well. Specific properties, often we do say we have 7 properties confirmed or 10 properties confirmed with a disease or a pest, yeah, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Nicole, too, on that, one of the challenges we've seen at the moment is figures around industry value and things like that as well. What's this industry worth? How many jobs? How many? So all that data, we're really reliant on planning to compile and verify.
Yeah, and that comes then in via industry as well, I suppose, because they are doing a lot of research and providing a lot of that information to you, and then you then have to check again, how did they get to those figures? How reliable is that? And oh yes, so that's there's a whole connection there. That's very interesting to follow that path. Cool. Was there any specific questions in the chat that I've missed, or?
Nope.
Oh, good. Operations is next up.
Well, that would be me. So hang on a sec.
Did you get the email, Nigel?
Yeah,
or
mate.
do you want me to? Okay, otherwise I can share. Yep.
No, it's just all a bit slow over here. That'll be my fault. Bear with me.
The Premiere
we-
function, I like it.
You can see that?
We can see
Yes.
that,
Good
That's
eye.
right on the screen.
I just thought I'd slip that in there, see if anyone noticed. Well, I think the most important thing is what can we provide to PI, and we need to be able to provide them with key messaging, what needs to be delivered to the public and elsewhere, and that information needs to be correct and verifiable and timely, because we all think our own stuff is far more important than providing information to anyone else. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. Also, depending on the response, we have to make sure the information we give is technical and correct, but in layman's terms, so we're not confusing anyone, and has to be consistent, and there has to be a single point of truth that we in Ops are going to get information out to PI, so that information is true. And what we need from PI, we need to be provided with the right messaging to give to the right people, and when, and that can be usually out in the field, and that comes back to the next thing, which is resources to do that, materials, fact sheets, and they've got to be not only correct in content, but also fit for purpose as far as what form they take. And as also we need from public information intelligence and feedback about what they need from us, and what gaps are identified, and what audiences are involved, so that we can cover all the bases. And also we need from public information the realisation that we've got a fair bit on, and everything that PI can do to help us is great, and that includes reduce the amount of face-to-face and constant providing of information that we have to do. But if PI can shoulder some of that load, either with resources they provide us to hand out or to have with us out in the field, or to provide a call centre type mechanism so that people can be referred to the call centre to get that one source of truth as a public. And have I forgotten anything, Ops team? All right.
Right. That's really, really good. And especially I like that technical information, because those conversations can become really technical, that you put it in layman's terms, that you translate that. And that also that you really highlight that Ops need that support in getting out the messages in order for your operation to run smoothly in the field. Was there another Ops group, or was there one Ops group? One?
I believe just the one.
Okay, Kirsten and Nicole, was that on point from Ops?
I was in the Ops breakout room.
So you are. Good. So that's really, really excellent. So in operations, you are in the field, you are directly engaging with the directly affected stakeholders, and so that can be challenging. So public information can make that easier for you by having those messages out there on why it is important, what's going to happen, where they're going to get more information, and to provide that support. Okay.
And I think, Lisa, when I started to prompt the team a bit more to think about the various functions that PI provide, it was like, oh yeah, we refer things to the call center. So of course we would need that. Oh, and we print front of gate signage. So yes, we would need that. So once you start thinking through the functions of what we actually deliver, there's a lot of stuff that would come to the Ops team. And for me, the ops team is super important for us in terms of delivering information on the ground as our face of an incident, but also providing that intelligence back around what's needed and the sentiment that's out there among producers in the community.
Mm-hmm. Does it ever happen that public information assists with providing training or guidance on how to deal with certain challenging messages, delivering certain challenging messages?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what we would do. So, and we've also stepped in and done things like, you know, we've had feedback from the ops team in incidents where media have been camped out the front of a particular property, trying to get interviews with the owners and the like. And we've actually provided, like, a member of our media team to provide expert advice to those property owners on how to deal with that, whether or not they do media or not. If they do decide to do it, how to handle that. So, and that's all come
awesome.
from feedback on operations on the ground. So we're really reliant on that intel. Yeah,
you need to know that there's a need for that on the ground. They need to provide that information on what's going on, what the community sentiment is, and where it's challenging and where you can provide support, and then you can put the right measures in place. Okay, that is really, really valuable to understand. The logistics team.
That would be us. Okay, so we thought that public information need from logistics support for communication events, like community events, for their catering and venue hire and setup. Requests for training to be organised through biosecurity systems who sit underneath logistics. They need resources and staff from logistics, feedback and clear communications from logistics, and assistance with any supplies necessary, for example, printed pamphlets, office equipment, and telephone setup. Logistics needs from public information, contact information for their appropriately skilled staff and their availability, because they often are really good at filling their own rosters, which is great. Contact information for appropriately skilled staff for the call centre and their availabilities. Clear communication and detailed information on proposed meetings, community events that require venue setup, for example, the numbers attending, and really clear feedback and clear comms.
Yep.
Did I miss anything, team?
That sounds good.
Excellent. And Kirsten, what do you think, Nicole?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. I know for logs it is where it can be a difficult group to work with, because we do have odd needs and requests and things like that, and a lot of it is specialist stuff that we need. I'll just give you an example. Yesterday there was a discussion around Varroa in our team, and somebody said, wouldn't it be great if we could get a 3D printed model of a Varroa mite to use as part of our kit, resource kit? Anyway, one of our team actually went and found a company that have a range of images. You provide them the image and then they can convert that into a 3D printed model. And it's that sort of really niche stuff that we do, that you go to logistics and you get the look of like, really?
I have had the weirdest requests with Varroa mite, like getting mesh cut to a certain size to sit on top of sticky mats, and yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, we can be tricky to work with.
Excellent. So yes, so logistics, sorry, is assisting with providing the resources and needs to be very much on top of what public information must need. So you need that information and to provide the resources, the people, the printed materials, the distribution and the like. Excellent. So that gives us a better understanding of public information and how it works together with others. Did anyone have any other further questions about this particular topic?
Lisa,
yeah.
Lisa, I put a couple of things in the chat because
Mhm.
it's quite interesting about process. And it was an interesting one is that do operations go through logistics for signage, which I heard, yeah, this is what we want from PI signage or leaflets. Does that go through logs? And then I got operations or Nigel came back and through said, yep, I think it needs to go through logs. But then I got back from Kirsten saying it should go through PI. And sometimes this is what actually happens in these responses, that what happens is confusion about where things go. And so I think it's very important right up front for people to be very clear who goes where, so you don't have confusion, duplication, double ups and the rest. So I've just put that one in just to throw it in. And it was interesting to see that two different areas had two different thoughts. I don't know what is right from there, but I'll just let it go to just put up to.
I can answer that. So for me, it's pretty clear. If it's an information request, so if it's for a product that needs to be, that's a public information product that you need produced, that wouldn't go through logs. So that would come to us in PI to say, we've got an information gap on this. And the thing is, you wouldn't even be specifically asking for a particular piece of collateral. It's normally from planning, we've got an issue with this. We need some public information around it. We would then decide what the channel, collateral, materials that need to be produced are, liaise with planning on that. When we get to a stage of that needs to be printed, distributed, that sort of thing, we would work with logistics on that. So I think the other thing too, a lot of the time we get requests for particular products, but we're not given the context of the issue, and we're not going to just produce a product without that context of what's going on, because that particular product may not be the best way for us to address that issue. So I'd say from operations and planning, it's a discussion about this is the issue or the information need or the intel that we're seeing. We produce the plan around that, the strategy, the tactics, and then we work with logistics on what those products are. But if there's products in existence and you're like, we need 20 more signage pieces, like we need 20 more pieces of signage on the ground for this, then that's where logs would definitely come into play. Does that make sense?
So if it's a new thing about comms, then the idea first has to be sanity checked by public information. Is this actually what we need to be doing? If you're ordering more signs of the same, then you can go directly to logs.
Yeah.
Cool. That makes perfect sense. And I think the whole conclusion out of that is to keep as many functions informed in anything you're doing is critical, because it might have an implication across all of it. So that communication through the IMT, keeping each other abreast of what's going on, what's happening, what you're doing is critical for all. Okay, so Michelle, you might chip in on this one, because I do have an incident controller's view on public information shared by the formidable Gavin Rawson, who unfortunately can't be there today, but asked me to pass on these words around what an IC's view is of public information. And he mentioned that it sets the tone for public confidence. So if the public confidence is there, so if the community is not outraged and the growers are not outraged, then politically and industry generally are calmer as well. When there's community outrage, then the other ones start arcing up as well. So having the public confidence is critical. And also to keep that information pushed out proactively, because, and we say this all the time, if there's no information, someone will fill the void and it's a message you don't want. So you need to be on the front foot of communication, and public information can do that for you, so you don't have to continuously react to an issue. You can just focus on your response because that key messaging is out there. He also communicated that public information will be able to provide a high-level understanding to key stakeholders on what has happened, what we know, especially what we don't know. That's important too. What we're going to do, what we want them to do, all those key things that are crucial for implementing a response. Public information will ensure that that is communicated across the key stakeholders, so that they don't keep bothering you, that they know what to do, and you can focus on the response. The role is crucial as well because you want the community and industry confidence so you can effectively move forward. So that's that side noise. If you don't engage them sufficiently, you don't have your communication on the front foot, then you will continuously be sidetracked with responding to community outrage issues or industry challenges or requests or things that they want to disrupt with. So as much as you can push out to keep the communication going, that they understand what's happening and what's going on, what's expected from them, will remove the side noise. They also save resources, because if you have to respond to all these issues caused by either lack of communication or poor communication, then you have to dedicate a lot of resources to that. If you're on the front foot with your comms and you ensure that you avoid those sidetrack issues, then you can focus those resources on actually doing the response and not chasing all these other issues around that are caused just by communication challenges. And also whenever things look like changing, a significant decision or another aspect requiring the info out there, you can get public information to assist you with getting that out there before it becomes a problem. And then the front line, so they can implement preventive measures by having that communication, by ensuring that people are clearly informed and educated on a particular hazard, on what measures are being taken, why those measures need to be taken, and how those measures work towards either protecting the industry or the community members or other things, so that they can be educated, so that they can support and have the buy-in that you need to implement your response strategies. Gavin also did say for public information what he would like to see from them is that they use the correct systems, and all the correct records management templates and systems as per the response. And also that if you're working in public information, it's critical to understand all the structures at play, which is the consultative committees, the structures of the SCC, LCC, forward command, all those sort of things, and that they're absolutely clear on how all those different response entities work together. That's what the IC. Michelle, did you have any further comments you would like to add to that from an incident controller?
Oh, no, I think Gavin's pretty succinctly summarised all that, but I think that idea about public confidence is really quite critical because it just means everyone else can focus on their job without all that external noise going on at both the political level and that public level. And having been involved in, White Spot's a prime example. It was really critical that we got that good messaging out there to the public to give them confidence that we knew what we were doing, because that negative media feedback and everything else, it really does have some severe impediments on staff welfare and just the general feel of the response. I mean, it's a very stressful environment at the best of times. So it's really critical that we get that messaging out there and yeah, that we, like I said, just get that confidence that people are doing what they know is the right thing to do. And I think it just helps everybody along the way. So yeah, I think Gab summed that up really well.
Thanks, Michelle. And thanks for reinforcing that message as well about mental well-being and how that gets affected. So before I pass to Kirsten, I just had a couple of things I'd wanted to mention that we're going to need for the activities later around stakeholder engagement, various channels of communicating and risks that I wanted to share. So just to keep that in mind when you're doing the activities later, and then after that I'll pass to Kirsten for presentation, and then we'll go to break from there. Okay, so when we are thinking about, and I know Kirsten will talk to this as well, empathy is crucial when we're communicating with the community or the growers or the producers that are affected. So the people that are under threat, walk a mile in their shoes as well. The empathy piece is critical, and really think about what they might be feeling and what information they might be needing. So they might need to know what is the threat, what do they need to do to prepare, what do they need to protect their farm, or when it's ongoing, what is the emergency, what does it mean for me, what do I need to do, where can I go for help. Really put yourself in the position of the person that is affected by the threat or the emergency, so that you can think about what information they may need to feel more comfort or take the right action at that point in time. We keep reiterating this, tell them what we do, but also tell them what we don't know. Tell them what we're doing, tell them what we want them to do. That is really, really critical in that in the communication to get that messaging across. It's fine to not know certain things and be transparent about that. We saw that during COVID as well, where people say, we know this, we don't know that, but this is what we're doing about it. And that's fine. People accept that. If you start going around the subject, then people go, what's going on? That's weird. There's something sus, and then you lost the trust. When it comes to stakeholder engagement, it's important to think about the why, where, when, how, and what. So there's various different channels, and that's why all those roles are within public information. Contact center, social media, general media, flyers, brochures, signs. There's so many different things to engage. And it's important to think when what is appropriate, and that's why that conversation we just had is so valuable. When do you use what? Public information needs to be involved in that conversation to do a sanity check on when what is appropriate and what are you trying to achieve. Are you trying to just inform your stakeholders? Are you trying to warn them, tell them about an impending threat or an emergency that's going on? Are you trying to direct them? Do you want them to take action? Do you want them to do something? Do you want to engage them? Do you want their buy-in? Do you want them to provide you with information, or maybe report suspicious activity, or it's just anything that can assist you with your response? Or do you want to collaborate with them? Do you actually want to work together where there's information going back and forth, and where you share updates on activities and actions that you're taking? You're using different tools for these different things. If you want to collaborate, you might use MS Teams. If you want to inform, you might use social media. It's like, when do you use what? It's based on what you're trying to achieve. So let's keep that in mind for the activity later. And then we're also going to talk about stakeholder risks. This is just a couple. And some of them are that if stakeholders are uninformed or misinformed, that is highly disruptive to your response, because that will keep everything off track, because they will have more information requests. They might take actions that are misguided, and it will disrupt your response. They're either uncooperative, just not in support of what you're trying to achieve. You don't have the buy-in, or they're trying to exercise influence. So they're using their communication channels to disrupt your response. They might have a political agenda that is in conflict with the response strategies. It might be about an animal welfare agenda that is absolutely at the top, and not understanding how these biosecurity measures actually work towards animal welfare. Misunderstanding for the need of response strategies, especially around animal destruction and movement controls. Those are really unpopular response strategies that require a lot of communication to get the buy-in and the support, and to explain why that is needed. And the overall community sentiment and trust in the response. Consumer sentiment. Is this safe to eat? Yes or no? Do I even want to consume this product? Am I going to move away from this now? And there'll be many others, but this is just to trigger your mind when we're asking about stakeholder risks. Some of the key things that you can consider, which the consequences could be political. If there's and that was what Gavin was saying as well. If their community is not on board, or there's outrage, that could have political consequences, that could have operational consequences, because they're now disrupting your response. There might be all sorts of circumstances that could result in legal consequences. If they're questioning your response measures and they go into request for information, and you have to demonstrate the actions you took and how you took them and how you got to them. Reputational consequences. So really think of controls that you have to put in place there, and there's all sorts of things you can do to manage it. I'm sure Kirsten will talk to it as well. So what can you do? You can forward scan, so based on previous responses, or just really things about those key stakeholders, how they're going to react, what are the kind of strategies you can put in place from then. Keep that public information risk register, maintain those risks, identify them by having a collective group across your functions, and talk together about the various risks for various stakeholders. Make it a daily agenda item to discuss it daily. What are we envisioning the stakeholder risks to be, and also revisit regularly as a response. The public information environment changes so quickly that now it's even more important to revisit this regularly. So that's just a couple of tips about the activities we'll be doing later in the session. So before I pass over to Kirsten, is there anyone that has any questions about this particular bit? I know Kirsten will talk to it as well, so might want to save your questions for her. Yes, all good? Kirsten, I'll drop my screen and you want to share your slides from there, or do you want to share it from here?
Do you mind sharing, Lisa?
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, all good.
That'd
Yeah.
be good. I'll just let you know when I need to go to the next one. Thank you. So I just wanted to share, I guess, some of the things that we find in responses that I guess make our job easier, but then I think overall, as Lisa said, it makes the job of the whole response easier. But the first and foremost is engage with public information as early as possible. We do, and it's happened to me recently where we have been, I guess, left out of the loop on particularly around those early hours and days of a response where things are standing up. PI should actually be one of the very first things that are stood up in a response, and we're usually need to be working well before any sort of IMT is stood up. The other thing is things can be done concurrently. So if there's movement control orders, for example, being drafted, we actually should be at the table as part of that process, because we can actually be drafting the bones and frameworks of things before that movement control order is finished. And we can then get that finished with the SMEs not long after the movement control order is done. And I know that that's a difficult thing to do sometimes, but we had a recent example of one where literally we were given the movement control order, and within 5 minutes of receiving that, we were requested by our senior staff in our minister's office to provide the media release, the FAQs, the social media posts, and the web page that was going with that movement control order. And we had 1 hour to pull all of those materials together, and we had only just seen it. So for us, it's like if we can do those things concurrently, and I guess this is working really closely with the planning team, and this is well before, as I said, even the whole formal arrangement is stood up. In some cases, then that makes everyone's life a bit easier, but it certainly takes the pressure off us a bit more. The other thing is one of the tricky things that we have is we have to ensure that there's consistency across all of our channels. So making sure that our scripting for our call center matches up to our talking points, matches up to our web pages. And there is a fair bit of work that goes into that. So in terms of SMEs checking things, ensuring that we have those talking points as our core information and it's ticked off is critical, because we build everything else off the back of that. So that central point of truth is something we talk about a lot in the public information space, and that is so critical for us to have. The other thing that we have to do is turn the complex into something simple. And I know that there's often a lot of debate between SMEs and PI about how to word things to make it easier for stakeholders, but also maintaining the integrity of what we have to communicate within government. So, they're always robust discussions, and yeah, we need to land on a place with that as well. And then, as we said, the earlier we can be involved, the less reputational risk. Thanks, Lisa. So the golden rules, as we were talking about before, tell them what you know, tell them what you don't know, tell them what you're doing, and tell them what you want them to do. We do need to be comfortable in the tell them what you don't know space, because we will not have all the answers to a lot of complex biosecurity issues as we move through responses. And we need spokespeople who are comfortable sitting in that space and but tell them that we are going to action it and how we're going about that, and when we will have a timeline for that to be done, as much as is known. So that's really important. Thanks, Lisa. So this one, if you click on it again, it should bring up the picture. So we often talk about it's not about who's right, but who tells their story first. And that's what in the PI space, when we talk about being on the front foot, is all about. we want to be the ones out there talking about what's happening. If we create an information vacuum, then somebody else will fill that, and it may not be the message that we want. So we always need to be on the front foot in terms of how we approach our information and providing regular updates. And yes, that means that the PI team will probably be hounding people in planning and hounding people in ops and wanting that information. But it's because we've made commitments to filling that information space and not having someone else do it for us. I think the important thing about this, though, is people often think of this just in terms of media. It's not. It's how we interact with all of our stakeholders. And the example that I always use is if you have somebody, an infected property owner who's waiting on test results, and you've told them that those test results will be with them on Friday afternoon rolls around and they haven't heard from us, they are not going to be sitting there hypothesizing in the positive. They're not going to be sitting there saying, this is great, I haven't heard from biosecurity, it must be all good. They are going to be worried that it is a bad result. So if we don't have those test results and you have said that you will get back to them on a Friday afternoon, you need to call them, tell them that you don't have the results, tell them why, tell them what you're doing about it, and then give them a new deadline of when you're going to get back to them. Because, and I'll talk in a little minute about why those things are critical, but that basic communication is what can bring undone our responses, from that one-on-one engagement right through to our public media presence. Thanks, Lisa. So we want to be a trusted source. And we can only do that by being honest, open and inclusive. We need to be accurate in the information that we put out. When we have inaccuracies, it erodes public confidence and then it erodes trust in us. We need to have that point of truth, and we need to be on song with industry and community leaders, but also across government agencies. So that coordination role and making sure that other government agencies are working in with us as well is really critical. And PI play a really important role in bringing all of that together. Thanks, Lisa. So this ties to what I was saying before around the engagement space. If you just hit that, I think it'll bring up another couple of, yeah, and again. So, oops, that's all right. So I often talk about the iceberg. In a response, there's normally a lot of focus, particularly from areas like ministers' offices, around what's in the media, what's happening on social media channels. Obviously, advertising and website are big, I guess, front of house communication tools. But what we find is all of those tools will run more efficiently and I guess have less issues if you get your below the water engagement right. And that's the stuff people don't see. The effort that we put into stakeholder engagement, on the ground community engagement, industry liaison, internal comms, making sure our staff are all on the same page, customer service center scripting, all of that work under the water, which isn't highly visible, will save you in terms of media. So, you know, if you have somebody out there who is waiting for their test results and they don't get them, they may pick up the phone and ring the Courier Mail, or in our state for us will be the Courier Mail, and say to them, I'm waiting on these test results, you know, biosecurity is incompetent, they haven't gotten back to me, blah, blah, blah. And there's a news story that then brings it to above the line and becomes a bigger issue. So it's all of that engagement that is absolutely critical in keeping your response and your reputation on track. Thanks, Lisa. And I have presented that side a lot over the years. And one of my colleagues, when I started presenting it, he used to always say to me, yeah, it wasn't what was above the water that sank the Titanic. And it's very true. Get your engagement right and you'll have less problems. So thanks, Lisa.
I think that was
that's it from me. Thank you.
Any questions for Kirsten?
I might as well ask a question, because one of the things is that we, in your messaging, you say what we want them to do. Do we ever go back and say, this is what's going to happen if you don't do it? Because sometimes that's the, you might get 90% or 95% doing the right thing, but sometimes you have to actually have that, not just the carrot, but you also have to have the stick. Do you see that being put in as part of another one in there? Because it's really about, not just about what you have to do, it's what's going to happen if you don't do it.
Yeah, look, carrot and stick is definitely the way to go. Our social and behavioural research in recent times, though, tells us that the stick doesn't work as a lead. It's definitely something we can have, but I know biosecurity, and it has evolved, I think, in recent years, but it used to always have a big focus on the stick first, the compliance side of things, and that wasn't resonating with stakeholders. There's key things that drive people to do the right thing and make change. And we know in the ag space, livelihood's a big one. So if messaging's focusing around them protecting their livelihood, lifestyle is another big driving factor. And I'm trying to think what the third one was. Anyway, there's three that drive it, but it's not the macro stuff and it's not the compliance side of things. It's actually playing on the what are the impacts for you as an individual, and how do we, and then how do you mitigate that? So that's definitely where our social and behavioural research is focusing us.
Anne.
Yeah, so I've just got a question. I don't know if it's a question. It's about like overcooking it. So with public information, and what do they have in place to stop that? So an example would be where in the current situation in New South Wales, I think PI has done a fantastic job of getting the message out to beekeepers, but as a consequence, the general public. And we're getting a situation where we've got beekeepers reporting their own hives and every man and his dog in the neighbourhood dobbing in the beekeeper as well. So I'm not sure, and I'd love to know what can be put in place to prevent that overcooking of the message.
Yeah, look, that's a really hard one because especially when our responses cross over into that peri-urban space and that more community space, like when it's strictly an industry issue and we're only dealing with industry, it's I guess much easier to deal with. But when you cross over into that peri-urban or backyard owners and things like that, that's where it gets difficult. And there's no easy solution. It's one of those things that it depends what you want people to do. And I think it's being very clear about what you want people to do, and then highlighting for the general community that there's potentially no risk for them and that sort of thing, because like a lot of these sorts of things are generated by fear and misinformation. So it's just making sure that the messaging is very clear. And look, unfortunately, we have situations where organizations and individuals do things and they're doing it in what they think's in the best interest of what's happening, but they don't understand the consequences. I remember in Panama, we had a Woolworths stores in Brisbane put up signage all over the banana stand saying these bananas aren't affected by Panama disease, and all photos of diseased bananas and that sort of thing. And it actually just sent a ripple effect through the consumer side of things. And most consumers, particularly for us in Brisbane, were totally unaware of what was happening in North Queensland. So Woolworths were actually shining a light on something for consumers that there was no concern there and they didn't need to be doing that. And we ended up negotiating with them and explaining all of that, and they stopped doing it. But yeah, it's just people don't understand the effect of sometimes what they're doing, and then the consequences of what the ripple might be into the community. So there's no,
Yeah.
I don't have a silver bullet on that. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
I find
think-
I find PI like often hesitant to, when these things happen, like say this example is I guess the message got out through Sydney, and there must be a feral bee nest under the Carl Expressway near Circular Quay, and you can imagine the traffic that goes through there. And we've had like 48 separate reports, and so you can imagine what that does to the call centre, to data, to everything. And PI is very reluctant to actually send any messaging out to help us combat that. And so it's a curious one for me.
Because the thing is, it may be that if you put out a broad public message about that, it might actually exacerbate it. So like it, because that is a high traffic public area. So who do you target that message to? So yeah, it's a difficult one, and we have so many complexities like that to work through.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good question. Any further questions for Kirsten? Think it's time for a break? Yes. Awesome. Okay, 15 minutes. So we'll be back exactly here in the room to continue in 15 minutes from now. So enjoy your cuppa, and we'll see you back here in 15 minutes. Hello, everyone. Sorry, Greg, to cut your conversation.
I'm used to it.
All righty. Okay. Group 1, scenario 1. Who would like to brief back? Okay.
Would you like me to do that?
Penny?
Yes.
Yeah, go for it.
There's only two of us and you wrote everything down, so otherwise relying on my memory.
Okay. So we had scenario 1, which was producers are not allowing officers on their property to conduct surveillance. They're stating they don't know what it's for and why they would need to be there. These property owners are also on Facebook encouraging others not to let officers onto their properties. We said that the risks were significant reputational risks, including public perception of the government invading their privacy, a lack of confidence, and high political risks.
Lost you, Penny.
We might have to tap you in, Michelle. Penny's frozen, so we might have to pick up where she left off.
I didn't write anything down.
That's all right, Shell, you and I'll do it. It'll be fine.
What are we up to?
We just went into the what we can do to mitigate the risks. Some things around getting credible spokespeople to deliver public.
We talked about the importance of getting somebody who is credible to basically provide that information. So whether or not you have that one person, whether it's the chief veterinary officer or, in the case of COVID, I think we used as an example with the chief health officer being the one that sort of presented that information, just to provide that little bit of confidence again that it is somebody who's got a bit of cred. Whether or not they actually do or not, it's a different matter, but it's all about the perception of it all. But I think, what we said about mitigating it was essentially that we make sure that public engagement happens really fast and really early. And if it wasn't in place, then it's got to be number one priority now to get out there and be providing that message and that information. What else did we have? Yeah,
you had like a liaison with industry, engaging local networks and local government, those sorts, to make sure that we sort of got that in conduit as well.
Yeah, industry liaison being a really critical person to be dealing with, or critical function, I suppose, to be dealing with in this, in that, they've got more of a vested interest and probably more relatable for the grower or the farmer themselves. So using those industry networks to really get the message across and to provide some information on what the repercussions are. So why are we there to do the surveillance and what are the repercussions if we don't do it? I think that was one of the really critical things that we came up with.
Absolutely. We've got it back on screen, I can see.
Yes.
Are you there, Penny?
Back. It was very seamless. Michelle took over just perfectly. Is there any more from Jason? Do you think it's covered?
Oh,
now?
look, I think we can see, everyone can sort of read what we've covered there, and looking at some of those engagement strategies, and in particular, I think the big takeaway is ramping up early with the PI side of the business. That's the real takeaway here, and making sure that you got the ability to get on the front foot there, and whether it's myth busting on the Facebook or ensuring getting the point of messaging out there, and what are we doing there? We've got to now mitigate that sort of gap of information that was there for obviously from the onset. And so if anything from an IC perspective, it's ramping up that early and ensuring that you've got that public information capability well in place, and also linking to those and mapping those networks to ensure that we get that that local conduit as well as that to industry and the like. So I think it's all you can see there, and including even things like getting the appropriate engagement with police and the like, just to understand who we're dealing with, incorporating into safety plans with our operational staff that might need to go into those properties, making sure that we've got precautions in place and understand the intel around those that are in those properties that we might need to engage, or we need to engage. So
I think Greg made a note of that. Should the messaging delay operations doing their job? And from an IC perspective, my answer to that is yes, because whatever the disease is or happening on the farm, the welfare of your staff on the ground is the most critical. And you don't know what sort of mental issues this person's got. If they've got a gun and they're willing to use it, it's all about making sure that you're confident that those ops staff that are going to go on there are going to be safe, because at the end of the day, that's got to be your number one priority, or at least that's my my perspective on it all.
No, I concur, Michelle.
Lisa, just sorry to jump in just on this one, because these are all based on kind of situations we've had to deal with. Interestingly, this was one of the reasons, and this is going back quite a few years ago now, why we implemented kind of an engagement flying squad. And it was around the time of Hendra virus, and we would have kind of community engagement officers go and door knock neighbouring properties during Hendra, and they weren't there to do anything other than to talk to those property owners about what had happened, what it meant for them, that they would next be getting a visit from a compliance officer. This is what they would do, all of that sort of thing, to pave the way for the compliance staff to then come in, or the operations staff to then come in and do testing and all of that sort of thing where they needed to. So just having that, look, we're not here for anything else but just to talk to you, and then having the people that have to come in and do the things that they need to do on those properties just pave the way for us, because we had some pretty nasty situations like this where people were like, you're just not coming on my property. I don't know who you are. I don't know why you're here. So, yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Very good point.
This just brings up the issue of biological risk versus health and safety risk versus reputational risks versus risks. And at some stage, the IMT or whatever, because managing all these risks can also have impacts on the other risks. And so, if suddenly you've got, for foot and mouth, you've got a property that you actually have to quarantine or have to do immediate stuff, so therefore something's not going to happen. How does this risk matrix structure come into place when you're dealing with so many different multiple risks? Just something which I think the planning people will be knowing in here, as well as the IMT. How do these all fit in as a priority to get something done? And sometimes this does lead to some confusion. Yes, I agree, staff are number one. That I got no problems with that. So I'll put health and safety right up there. What then comes between reputational risk versus biological risk or the rest? So anyway, just a question which I think is really important for IMT when we talk about cross-functional stuff.
I think it's a great one, Greg, and I think it's the old adage from emergency management. It depends. It depends on each situation, and it's also where it really comes into play the incident controller's intent. And what is the expectations in relation to prioritisation, and as you rightly highlight, it's that key interaction between each of the leads of each of the functions, working with the incident controller, and in fact then if it's and then getting that advice upward as required. But good point, mate. It does depend.
Oh yeah, and I think one of the ones that I didn't put in there is political risk.
Yeah.
And how does political risk jump on top of all these different things? Because I know what can happen very, very quickly in this sort of space. So, you know, if you actually have that risk matrix, I think it's very, very important. When you say the intent for the IMT and the IC, it will be good to see how this all links through.
Yeah, and ensuring they're mapping it.
For sure. Just capturing it is the most important thing to start with. And as you can see from this exercise, that there's a very good understanding of what the reputational risks are from group 1. So group 2, scenario 2.
Yes.
What came out of that conversation?
I'll share my screen too. All right, so our scenario was that following an animal disease outbreak in a local community, schools in the area have had reports of children of parents who own or work on the property being bullied. One child was even refused entry onto the local school bus for fear of disease spread, and the local media is now running the story. So this is a bit of a brain dump from an ops perspective, I guess. The most important thing is that we need to get clear messaging out there about what the real risks are. We talked about some of the reputational risks as being that there's the correct information about transmission, etc., of this disease is not being put out there, and having misinformation or wrong information can really escalate the issue. There's a risk that will no longer be considered the authority as the source of truth. And also we talked about the confidentiality relating to the IPs themselves, and if our trust is eroded, then people may not trust us to share information about their own properties. And then some of the things that we can put in place to mitigate these risks is have a coordinated response to all sources of media and update with actual facts. We talked about having workshops or meetings for stakeholders to allay any concerns and provide real truth and facts. And that could be in the form of school newsletters, community newspapers, in social media, having town hall meetings, and that sort of thing. We also talked about potentially involving social services to support the schools and those on the properties as well. Have someone go and actually attend a school assembly and sort of talk about the facts and the importance that everyone's role in managing this response. And we thought it was really important to identify a local trusted champion from the community to act as a spokesperson, so they may be more inclined to trust someone from their own community. Also, the local media is now running the story, so really important to get in touch with them and provide facts directly to them, and hopefully they might change their spin. And we also lastly started talking also about involving the bus drivers so that they're aware of what their requirements are if they really can refuse entry onto the school bus.
Yeah. They sound like really, really good measure. Kirsten, did you want to reflect on that?
I just think this one highlights just how far kind of a reach into the community these issues can have. And one of the things that I always say is that fabric of the community pulling together is really important for us having a good response outcome. And if you see, the fabric starting to pull apart within the community, that's a real worry to our response efforts. So these sorts of things might seem trivial, but they can I guess have a real impact on the community very quickly and community sentiment. So it is stuff that needs to be addressed and taken seriously.
Very good point. Excellent. And group 3.
Okay. Right, just finding my page. Okay, we had scenario 3. 3 days after announcing through the media a new case of a plant disease on an additional 2 properties, It turns out the test results were false positives. Stakeholders, including media, will need to be notified of these results. So we needed to discuss the scenario within the group, including the impacts and how would we address them. So we initially, I guess, spoke about impacts being mistrust and confusion, questioning the quality then of the other existing positives, so quality assurance, known risk that potentially had been realised, human social impact that may have occurred, and also financial loss. We did kind of toss it around a bit and struggle between the two of the impact and the reputational risk. But two things we landed on with that were, as a reputational risk, if it had happened before, and as we mentioned, a known risk that had been realised, it could have been the embedding of incompetency and the breaking of a trust relationship as a biosecurity agency. We then just went on to talk about what we could put in place to mitigate the risks, and it was mentioned checking standard operating procedures and investigations into what had happened, and then a potential rerunning of samples of the other positive tests for quality assurance to see how bad the problem was. And then public information, explanation and clarity, like be clear about what happened, not hide it, and then give an explanation of how it happened and how we would change the SOPs, etc., to stop it happening again.
Excellent. And that was a really, really good conversation. And Kirsten, did you have anything to further add to that?
Just again, this was based on what we experienced during Panama. So we had a false positive, and it turned out that there was an underlying flaw with the international gold standard test that had never been discovered before, but trying to explain that in plain English to the Courier Mail, who's going to run the front page story, is really tricky. And in doing that, trying to make it so that it doesn't erode industry confidence in what we're doing is massively problematic for us. So again, it's where that engagement comes into play. So making sure we had the engagement with industry to talk them through the technicalities of it versus what they were seeing on the front page of the Courier Mail, for example. So your relationships really come into play when you're in situations like this.
So across these three, the two words I keep hearing is engagement and trust. You need to maintain the trust and you need to maintain the engagement in order to keep the trust as well. So the moment that you're doing things that are affecting people's trust, it starts to become, your response seems to become unstuck. And one of the key controls or mitigation seems to be the continuous engagement. And that even goes to the point of with some of these scenarios, the school, bus driver, like it seems you would never think of it at the start, but when these things unfold, those sort of stakeholders all of a sudden you start to engage. And even with the second one, where the police, if there's people refusing people onto their property, making police aware of these challenges so that when the call comes in, they are prepared of what it is about is super important. So engagement and trust, that's what I think, Kirsten, you would concur. Maintain the trust and maintain the engagement. Cool. Awesome, everyone. So if you could email the sheets for whoever was described to Carolyn so that we can capture the outcomes of this part of the workshop, that'd be fantastic. And also, Nicole, did you have any more challenges about public information and things you can do you wanted to share? Nicole.
Sorry, just a lag with my mic coming off there. No, it's been great to hear the discussion and what you've all been working through and hearing those reputational risk teased out a bit more. I did have a couple of other concrete examples just to bring it to life for you a bit more so you can see how it does play out in real life. During avian influenza, an example in Victoria, we had the turkey farm in Gippsland in the state's southeast. We did go through to the effort from a stakeholder engagement perspective of contacting lots of neighbouring properties in the area that had pics, but we didn't go to the effort of contacting the properties without pics. Next day, front page of the local newspaper, turkey travesty was the headline in big black bold caps, and talked to lots of really upset neighbours about what was happening on their farm next door. They didn't have livestock, so they weren't required to have a pic. We didn't have their details. We didn't go through, you know, it was the height of coronavirus lockdowns in Victoria, so we weren't doing unnecessary door knocking at that time, so we'd had that at the back of our mind. But these people were like, they were complaining about gunshots, which wasn't the destroy method, and I'm not an ops expert, so I can't clarify that for you, but that's what was in the paper, whether it was accurate or not, that these neighbours were listening to gunshots all day long of turkeys being destroyed. And just how upset they were and stressed by the situation. So that's, was a big reputational risk that we had to balance, and really showed, that below the line engagement that Kirsten was talking about, how important it was. Another example, a more recent one that hopefully lots of other states will be able to sympathise with, in Japanese encephalitis. At the beginning, Public Info team was really working towards getting out a, what can we, what's the pack that we need to give producers when our ops team are visiting farms. It's, week 1, week 2, it can't be everything under the sun, but what's the basic thing that we can get done now and we can improve as we go. And sitting in a joint meeting with health, we were like, what are the things we know that farmers are asking? They want answers on. We don't have to have all the information, but if we can give them something. And at that time, what was the big topic? It was human vaccine. That's what farmers wanted to know. That's what their staff wanted to know. Can we get vaccinated? And health went away and came back and said, no, strike that. We're not including it. And I went, what? And they went, no, we don't know the answer yet. There's conversations going on. So we can't include that. And I said, but all the AgVic staff are receiving this question every single day from every single producer they talk to. How can we just say, let's not include that? What have we learned? And this comes back to Kirsten's messaging about, the tell them what you know, tell them what you don't know. And all I wanted was a little line to put in a document that the ops people could talk to, that they could hand them in a document that just said, there's discussions underway about human vaccines, and there'll be more to say on this later. It didn't have to say, yes, they're available. This is the eligibility criteria. We didn't need all of that. But with that, giving people that answer gave them something. And in not saying that's the bigger risk than not saying anything at all. Yeah, I'm sure that probably was a thing felt in all states dealing with JE at the time.
Yes, and in COVID as well. Similar things, but those are two very, very good examples. Thank you for sharing those, because that definitely highlights the importance. And you wouldn't think it to include the properties that are not actually affected, but they are affected in a way because they're in the zone. So yeah, you wouldn't think of it, but that's a very good lesson. I think going forward, you will
Lisa, just a question from Greg in there. So should PI be providing information for all risks, not just reputational risks? It's a thought from PI on that one.
Well, the reputational, sorry.
I think all risks should be discussed at that IMT meeting. And that is a group thing where it's not just Public Info, but ops planning, Public Info, ILO, incident control, collaborate on them. And I think it doesn't make sense to exclude any of the functions. Do others agree there?
Yeah, I suppose why I raise this is because if you ever look at the definition of reputational risk, it talks about the negative impact on a brand or service being provided when you actually see definitions and the rest. So you're really looking at a lot of the negatives there about how we're going to deal with the negatives. I suppose the PI of getting on front foot is also promoting a lot of the positives. Now, I don't know what the opposite to reputational risk is versus where the positives are, and how do we promote that You know, we've had no OC health and safety issues. We've had great biological. We've dealt really well with biological risks through PI. We dealt a lot with reputational risk, and so yeah, is reputational risk equal to biological risk, OC health and safety risks, and the rest? It's just to try and get in perspective, because we use a lot of the times PIs just for reputational risk. I don't think that's.
I think in this case, and sorry, and it's very important to the fact that, well, like we were talking on at the property, if people don't know why they need to be on the property, they get aggressive, which results in a safety risk, which can result in an operational risk, which results in, so they all flow into each other. The reputational issue or the comms issue causes all the other ones to occur. Nicole,
yes. Yeah. So that's why I think using reputational risk is most probably not the right wordage there, because I think it's dealing with any of the risks. How do we address any of the risks through PI? Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's just mostly just something that, because I deal a lot with risk and we tend not to really.
No, it's a good point. Anybody, and that's what we were talking about it before, is that risks, the consequences of these sort of risks go through ops, go through legal, go through reputational, go through even financial. It goes into all those realms of consequences. So we're just going to move to the next activity where we're talking about various channels. Oh, so I'll share my screen as well. The various channels through which we can communicate in a biosecurity response. So we now want to just put you in breakout groups, and this is going to be a quick one. So we're going to talk through the various channels through which we can communicate in a biosecurity response, and judging by the different roles within the public information function, that kind of gives you guidance on the various channels. So we're looking here at maybe text message, social media, general media, flyers, all those sort of various ways through which you can communicate. What are the risks with that particular channel, and what potential measures can you put in place to mitigate those measures? So, for example, on social media, you can put a post out and then there's all these comments following that you can't control what's being said per se. So what can you do? You can maybe turn off comments or not post anything that you know will cause controversial conversation, those sort of things. Is everyone okay with that? Is activity sheet 3. You will have about 10 minutes by the time you get booted and come back to talk about these channels, risks and risk mitigation measures. And activity 4, we'll do that in a plenary session and discuss that after this before we wrap up for today. So is everyone clear with the task? Awesome. You'll be now moved again to your breakout groups, 10 minutes, and then booted back here. I just thought if we get group 3, I think it's Susan, to brief, and then others to listen carefully and brief after that by exception.
No worries.
You're on mute, Susan.
Susan, you're on mute.
Sorry.
Oh, yes, got
it. Communication channel, first one we came up to was websites. Some of the risks were the accuracy and currency of the data and how often it's updated. Yeah, and some of the mitigation measures were to maybe have a dedicated team to monitor and ensure, or, you know, ensuring that there's like a currency date that goes with that information. Some of the other things we talked about was that it can be difficult to find with too many links to go through, so people just give up because they can't just go straight to that information. So having it easy to access, I suppose. And something else we also brought up was that you know, there are situations where there may be no power or no internet services. So what can you do in that space? So by sort of like having a package or talking points for people to talk about, that will sort of cover that. The next communication channel was social media, you know, risk, worst nightmare. And the risks are with like who responds to these questions or people that are putting stuff out there and what's real and perceived. So again, we thought one of the mitigation measures would be to have a dedicated person or team to monitor and respond. Something else we did add in there is that it can be a real community connection as well. So it could bring up where there may be further concerns or areas that need to be addressed. So by monitoring and keeping that up, it can sort of like monitor what's sort of happening on the ground. We then also, other channels were media engagement, and we broke this down into both visual and spoken. I suppose from a spoken perspective, one of the risks is like, you know, getting those curly questions that are thrown in at the end if it's a media interview or something like that. So one of the mitigation risks we came up with was media training, but not only just media training, but making sure that the person who is speaking is comfortable in dealing with those curly situations. Some other channels were the call centres and that sort of like community engagement where it's physical and in person. Again, it can be similar with sort of like curly questions or information that's coming in. So ensuring that like there's talking points available to whoever's on at the front face, I suppose, to deal with those questions. And similarly, again, with field staff, you know, like ensuring that there's consistent messaging across the board with talking points.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, Susan. So it comes down to having the resources as well to fulfill roles, to do monitoring of websites and social media, as well as having the tools and the messaging and the scripting in order to track that. And social media, it is one of those things, it's a great pain in the back, but also a great tool and can be really used in your favor. So yes, it's like that. Group 2, was there any other things that you had outside of what was just mentioned? No?
I think we're two, so let's just share my screen with you. Everybody can see it? Excellent. So pretty much we just got 3 different channels. So the face-to-face and online meetings. So the risk were not having enough or right audience attending, not advertised correctly. So sometimes the time is not applicable, and having the right people to deliver, facilitating the meetings as well, and potential to have heated discussions. So the risk we thought that could be multiple meetings might be required, physical and electronic handouts to be provided afterwards, having the recording available as well, and follow up after the event if they have any questions, and provide fact sheets, Q&As, websites, and things like that. In the social media, we thought about the risk of being controversial comments leading to misinformation and no moderating availability to control those responses as well. And the mitigation would be ensure the media is well established and monitored, provide useful and timely information, provide regular updates so they know when to expect the next one, utilize trusted source to publish our information to their right audience, or different websites, and people, they seek the information, so they get a very consistent approach, and identify champion to be the spokesperson too. So it's more we need people to attend those meetings. And the call center be having not having the number disclosed properly, not enough resources to attend the calls, not having correct scripting to handle the questions, and sometimes questions can be very unpredictable. And the mitigation would be creating a scripting and provide context for further information if they have the answers right away, and having a good resource to manage the calls as well. So that might be a good way to mitigate that. So yeah.
And there's a lot of risks with each one, and that's especially like for a call center, all the risks. You know, the not having the resources enough to have it, not having all the correct. So there's so many different things you have to think about. Actually, with just one channel, and then all the other ones. Big job for public information for sure.
Absolutely.
And group one, was there anything else additionally that you have?
I think that most of our points were covered by the other groups.
Yeah. So you would have to agree with it. Like it's about the resources that you have to put in place, and also there's various challenges. Awesome. Excellent. Well, thanks everyone. So that's really highlighted how big a job public information really has in managing all these different channels and all the different risks that go with that. And you can see how big a piece risk is really in public information, because constantly we're talking about the risk around reputation, the risk around implementation of measures, how communication either causes risks or fixes risk. It's really a conversation around risk, and you probably didn't expect how much risk we'll be talking through this particular session. So the final one is also about discussing the various stakeholders. Now, we're not going to go into breakout groups for this one. We're just going to do, we're going to ask you to put in the chat the stakeholders and why we need to communicate with them. But the scenarios of brown mum-related stink bug detection is confirmed after being reported by a business owner. Brown mum-related stink bug has been confirmed live in a shipment of tiles. They've been on the property for 4 days. The business is in a high-density industrial area, and at the back of the property is also a local government bush corridor. Tiles were transported by truck to the business from a local port about 15 kilometers away. Now consider the initial internal external stakeholders and why we need to communicate with them. So like we said before, do we need to inform them? Do we need to warn them? Do we need to direct them? Do they need to take an action? Do we need to engage them? Do we want their buy-in? Do we want information from them? Do we want to work with them? Do we want to collaborate? So just one per stakeholder, and really think broad and wide on all these different stakeholders that you would have to consider. Just drop it in the chat. We'll be monitoring it. And just a bit of information, the brown mum-related stink bug is an exotic plant pest. It has a severe economic consequences because it attacks over 300 types of fruit, ornamental tree, vegetable crops, and would be a nuisance for households if established. As the words say, it would not be smelling very pleasant either. So drop it in the chat. Who are the stakeholders and why would we need to communicate with them? Go for it. Broad and wide. For other business owners, we have to inform them and warn them for sure. Transport companies, engage, inform, direct, and collaborate. Yes, we want we want their buy-in. They need to know what's going on. We want them to take action, and we probably want to work with them in implementing response measures. It's about how we're selling the message in the first place. It was about a previous comment. Local government, for sure, because this can have economic consequences. Local government is responsible for consequence management, so they would have to inform, warn. They need to work with them in prevention and response and recovery if needed. Local, state, federal government. For sure, it needs to be at all levels so that the response can be coordinated. Orchardists, for sure, because it is also affecting them potentially. The port, for sure. And Kirsten, did you have any comments as well on what's coming through here, Nicole?
Yeah, these are good. I'm waiting for people to come up with some real outsiders.
Outside of the box ones?
Yeah.
Other users of the port. Yeah.
Is there a local land care group that works in the bush corridor area that can do surveillance sort of thing? So
Tile suppliers. Yep. How to take action to prevent these things from occurring. Container owners, all businesses. Keep going, peeps. There'll be more. Think outside of the square.
VMSB advocacy group. I'm sure there's one out there somewhere, Ben. VMSB Lovers Anonymous.
Yep.
Has anyone, I've missed some of them, has anyone put down our internal stakeholders as well that we need to consider?
The overrun suppliers because they might need extra supplies, I would think, Greg.
Yeah, the smell is not nice.
So you've got your internal stakeholders as well, you know, your director general, your minister's offices, like all of that sort of thing too.
No, nursery and garden groups.
Those other ones aren't outside the box, Kirsten.
No, they're not outside the box, but I'm just noticing they're not appearing on the list. So
in the box is also okay.
Yeah, in the box is also okay. So
any more?
And Lisa, the one I always talk about in this space that's interesting is like when we did banana farms, we didn't realize the number of people that actually traverse banana farms. So recreational fishers, school kids just taking a bike ride. Apparently there's heaps of bike tracks through banana farms, feral pig hunters. So there are all these groups that we didn't anticipate we would have to be talking to. So it can be really diverse once you start to scratch the surface on these things.
So is the advice that the moment you hear of a threat like this to really start working out the context? So if this particular property, where is it? What does that mean? You know, like
who's around? What does it look like? Where's the spread? What are the impacts of the particular pest or disease? So we normally get into a room for a period of time straight up on something like this and start to like whiteboard who, you know, a lot of it's virtually whiteboarding now, but get it down as to think really diversely about who we might have to be talking to here. And then the next step is to prioritize those stakeholders and then start looking at how we're going to reach them and who the best point is to reach them. Because some of these, it's not all PI that has to do this work. All of you engagement officers along with us, you know, and particularly ops and groups like that have a big role to play as that interface. So it may be that a whole lot of these get allocated to different people within the response, but we need to know where those touch points are.
Yeah. And I think that is a great way to wrap this one up as well, by explaining that this is a process that you need to kick in straight up, mapping these stakeholders, why you need to communicate with them, like you mentioned, how you're going to communicate with them, what are the risks, what are the risk mitigations, that needs to occur straight up. So if you're in another function and you don't see that occurring within public information, it's time to raise it in an IMT, I suppose, isn't it, Kirsten?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Lisa, just for me on all of this, we still hear quite regularly in the public information function that we're just there to pretty things up and, you know, make materials look good to go out the door and that sort of thing. Our function is far from doing that. Like, yes, that's a very small part of what we do, but I hope today's kind of highlighted the breadth of things that we cover and what we bring to the table in terms of how we operate. Because, yeah, I think there's a lot of myths. I often hear people say too, well, you know, the dark arts that you do in the public information space, and it's not that at all. It's just about good relationships, trust, and how you work with people. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for wrapping it up with those comments, because yeah, it's so important. Engagement and trust. That's what I'm going to remember for the rest of the day. Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole and Kirsten, for assisting with putting this session together today. That's much, much appreciated. Thanks everyone for actively participating. I really, really hope you got something out of it. I think Carolyn is going to bring up a QR code for which you